of the tailed beasts and what village had which at the current time. If she has the seven-tailed beetle sealed within her then I can't trade with her or she will outlast me. I need to finish this, but I need to get in close which may be a problem with her flying. Yuna adopted a much more serious expression now fully realizing just who she was dealing with. Secret Nanabi art. First hive. Upon Fu's command which was basically the command of the grand insect, Chimay the small bug swarmed around Yuna, who was trying to beat the small forms of life from the air. Fu let a small smirk play across her face, because those small bugs were not normal chakra parasites, they were also created with a unique poison that would render her opponent immobile, making the fight come to and smiled contently when she saw Yuna fall to the ground, but then her bugs fell dead, like a small bomb hit them. However, luckily one bug survived and returned to Fu with results. Fu girl, the bugs died because her chakra properties are greater than poisonous. The Archimay's urgent voice was tuned out at the last moment in favor of Yuna's voice that was suddenly behind her and way too close for comfort. Taking your concentration off of your opponent are we? Well that's just foolish. Fu then felt two fingers touch the back of her neck at its base and then the mint-haired Jinchuriki's world went dark. Her wings dissipated as her body shut down and her mind wandered into the realm of unconsciousness. Yuna landed on the ground lightly with a small sweat adorned on her brow from what she had to use in the fight, but she managed to save enough for the next rounds. The proctor moved closer to find that Fu was indeed out, unlike when Yuna faked it moments before the final attack. Winner by knockout, Yuna. Combat field, minutes later. Narumi stood looking at her classmate with a small smile, already knowing how gentle of a soul the boy had. The blonde-haired Kunoichi knew that he was probably already having his doubts about fighting her, and the reason he got to this round was because the idiot Choji fought the round before calling him fat. Narumi almost chuckled remembering how funny it was watching the boy from Taki flee from Choji's righteous anger. Narumi let out a small sigh before regarding Choji with a much more serious look. I know you don't want to fight me, and I don't want to fight you. So please give up. Choji looked down into his bag of chips, his lips pursing down into a straight line as he contemplated the offer he was given. It was true that he really didn't wish to hurt any of his comrades, it was always like that, even since the academy. Plus the young Akimichi wasn't even sure he could beat the Hokage's daughter. It was these kinds of situations in which Choji really missed the absence of Shikamaru. Plus he wasn't even positive that he could make the rank of Chunin this year because even his clan techniques were lacking. I don't know. He only needs one little push. Narumi thought with a small internal grin that she hid behind a calm visage. That grin would even make Naruto when in his prankster mode proud of his sister. Narumi was going through a small checklist of things that could tempt the snack-loving boy. She stopped dead when she realized that she was actually thinking about what she needed to tempt the snack-loving shinobi. I'm sure that Asuma-sensei promised you a barbecue for winning your first round match. Wouldn't you want to go there and enjoy your reward as soon as you can, instead of being stuck in the medical ward where they won't let you eat? Choji's eyes went wide when he realized the grave consequences of being stuck inside of a hospital bed. Not only would he not be able to eat, but he would also have to wait to go to his precious barbecue. His hands clenched slightly over his bag of chips, getting a small smirk from Narumi, seeing as how the gears were going in Choji's mind. Narumi stood there waiting patiently for the Akimichi heir's decision as was the proctor since she had yet to move seeing as the two comrades were being rather friendly. Alright, Proctor-san, I give up on the match. Choji said with a small smile obviously not all that beat up over forfeiting. The entire stadium sat in absolute silence at Choji's rather easygoing way of surrendering the match. Even the Kunoichi from Kumo who was acting as the proctor was looking at the Akimichi like he had grown a second head and that head belonged to Orochimaru. Every soul was thinking how he could pass up the chance to prove his worth. The only person who didn't seem shocked was the Nara in the competition who wore a fond smile as he shook his head lightly. The proctor was the first to break from the shock that had descended down on the stadium, but not before giving Choji one small disbelieving glance. Winner by verbal surrender, Narumi Namikaze Uzumaki. In the stands, did that just happen? Konoha's snake mistress asked in shock, even stopping from eating her dango so that she could try and figure out if what happened was real. Her best friend Kurenai wasn't all that sure either and even thought to check to see if it was a genjutsu. Kushina however couldn't help it as she started to break out into laughter, even going so far as to grip her ribs as her body shook with laughter. While it may have seemed like Narumi was trying to help Choji, all it really did was save her from a fight and conserve chakra. That's my girl. Asuma took a new cancer stick, replacing the one that dropped to the dirty ground when Choji quit without lifting a finger. Shaking his head, the bearded Jounin knew it was a mistake to promise his student barbecue before he was done fighting. What can you do? Asuma breathed out a sigh with a small shrug. Sakura was giggling, but not at Choji, no, she was giggling that a rival was wearing such a dumbfounded expression. Wiping the imaginary tear from her eye with her one good hand, Sakura turned to the Yamanaka heiress with a sly grin. So that's your teammate Aino? Oh, that's rich. The platinum blonde-haired Kunoichi's brow started to twitch hearing her rival's words, she couldn't help but sneer with displeasure. It was also the anger that made the words come from her mouth that she hadn't spoken in quite a while. Shut up, billboard brow. Sakura gasped, her eyes going wide before her hair shadowed her eyes, her one good hand clenching into a fist as she spoke. No, you shut up, Ino pig. And like that the two were forehead to forehead growling at each other. Combat field. Aku stood silently watching as Samui pulled out her weapon of choice, the tanto, and brandished it a few times underneath the sun's intense spotlight. Haku watched on silently, not intimidated by the display, but silently admitting that it was cool. Haku responded in kind by drawing the handle of Snowfall. This action caught the Kumagakure Kunoichi's attention as she watched on as a long, slightly curved blade sprung from the hilt. Samui allowed a frown to grace her beautiful face when she saw she was already at a disadvantage. Haku's sword was longer and could be augmented with chakra. Samui decided to try and use an unsavory tactic. You know that my sensei is an expert with a sword. Challenging me would most certainly lead to your defeat. Aku looked at her blonde opponent with a slight tilt to her head, since it didn't seem like Samui was the arrogant type. No, it had to be that she didn't want to have to deal with the challenges Snowfall provided her. Haku shook her head with a pleasant smile, sticking her left foot in front of her right, with her sword held out like a katana. She could never face Abusa if she gave up so easily, just like Choji had done minutes earlier. I am sorry, Samui-san, but I could never give up so easily. Zabuza-sama would never forgive me for taking such a way out. Samui nodded and sped forward towards Haku, who had already begun her swing, almost cutting Samui across the abdomen, but the blonde Kunoichi managed to halt all of her momentum. Haku smiled, ignoring Samui's discontent expression, opting to step forward with a downward slice with her blade made of ice. Samui stopped the ice sword with her tanto, holding her metallic blade against the base of the ice-natured weapon. Growling slightly, Samui lashed out with a swift kick for Haku's midsection. Haku's eyes glanced down the moment Samui's foot started to move, giving the ice Kunoichi plenty of time to dodge. The blonde from Kumo decided she would take the attack to the raven-haired girl from the village hidden in the mist. A quick slash from the short blade towards the long ice blade was easily blocked, but Samui had another trick ready this time. A sudden charge of electricity ran through the blade, shattering the ice and cutting across Haku's forearms when she blocked her torso from being stabbed. Haku shook away the tingling feeling in her arms in favor of channeling her chakra back into Snowfall, creating an exact copy of her first weapon. Haku lowered her blade back down, assuming the ready stance once more. Samui's eyes narrowed at her opponent, confused as to why she would recreate the same weapon when the outcome was obvious. Shrugging away that thought, Samui went forth, but this time ready to score a more debilitating hit. Her lightning-charged tanto descended towards the ice blade, but just before the weapons came into contact, Snowfall shifted. The blade shifted into more of a snowy breeze, and the wind killed the lightning charge, and the ice crystals cut across the top of Samui's arms. The two Kunoichi shared a relatively heated glare before starting to go through hand seals simultaneously. Naruto's mindscape. Naruto's Sharingan glanced around in a momentary stupor, finding not a combat field but crimson stone masonry. Looking up, Naruto saw the same crimson faint light diluted in the air, and Naruto knew just where he was, his mindscape. Of course, his resident demon had something that he needed to tell him. Naruto started to make his way down the dimly lit corridors with a small sigh. I guess I will see what Kyuubi needs from me. It didn't take long for Naruto to come to the familiar cage that the Kyuubi resided in. Naruto stood there silently as the large slitted orbs came to life. The raven-haired shinobi stood there motionless, waiting for the large fox to reveal himself. A large chuckle blew the sour water up, getting a light soak on his cloak, earning a scowl. Naruto was just glad that the water didn't have any kind of stench to it. Naruto asked, slightly miffed he was about to miss a promising fight unlike those prior. Tell me, Kyuubi, why did you call for me? The Kyuubi, who could sense Naruto's irritation, just laughed a little louder and longer than he would have under normal circumstances. Kyuubi's three tails swayed around in what Naruto would guess to be amusement. A terrifying streak of white signaled Kyuubi's malicious grin. Oh please, I have been watching those pesky flies fight, and there was nothing entertaining about this little spectacle. Anyways, I have some information that may or may not interest you, Ninjin. Naruto's eyebrow rose since this was a new interaction with the Kyuubi after months of on and off again conversation. Never had the Kyuubi been forthcoming with information, no, Naruto would have to go and ask if the Kyuubi had anything that could be helpful. Noting that he might have to return this for a favor, Naruto decided to take this gift he was being given. Okay then, what is it? Naruto asked, easily forgetting his irritation. One of my brothers, so to speak, has been reincarnated into this world. And from the sense of it, I would say it was the three tails. Kyuubi said with one eye open, regarding Naruto to see what his pseudo-container's reaction would be. As the Kyuubi expected, Naruto's only visible reaction was a gentle nodding of his head. Naruto nodded, taking the information because it was clearly valuable, but the problem was where the Sanbi would show up. Do you have an idea as to where the Sanbi could be? Naruto asked curiously since the Kyuubi was like a vast wealth of knowledge and it couldn't hurt to try and dip his hand into it. Kyuubi grunted slightly, closing his other eye, letting his tails fall to the ground, almost giving off the vibe that he had suddenly fallen asleep. Naruto waited patiently as Kyuubi started to think about his question. Well, when a tailed beast shows back up, it is like a brief beacon flash to the other Biju before we fall into hibernation, so we regain our power. Untailed beasts are reincarnated, we often show up in the place where we are most in tune with in accordance with nature. So I believe the turtle will be somewhere watery. Naruto closed his eyes and thought about that comment. It was very clear to the shinobi that the three tails would come back to the world within the land of water, but sadly Naruto didn't have any kind of influence within that land. Naruto shrugged softly since maybe in time he would, but not now. He did believe that the Biju sensing power was indeed convenient, but why complain about that? So what can I do for you then? Naruto asked, opening both of his red eyes, getting the Kyuubi to look directly at Naruto. Well, you can change the mindscape from this damnable sower to something more hospitable, because as shocking as it may be, I don't always wish to watch your life unfold. Kyuubi snorted, forcing himself to put a little venom behind his words, getting a light chuckle from Naruto. Nodding his head, Naruto stepped back and sat in a meditative position to focus his mental energy. The Kyuubi watched on as the bars slowly slammed back into the ground and the water drained away. Slowly green grass grew across the now field, followed up by a vast forest growing in the background. The flat ground the two were standing upon started to elevate up into the sky, creating a large hill where the Kyuubi was now basking on. Naruto focused on creating a few minor details within the forest for the Kyuubi to enjoy later. There, I hope you enjoy your temporary home. Kyuubi grunted and whipped his tail through Naruto's midsection, but it phased through like Naruto was intangible, something that happened often. In the mindscape, the Kyuubi couldn't harm Naruto unless Naruto openly accepted the confrontation. Just get out of here. We have been here too long and now you are needed outside. And with that, Naruto was forcibly ejected from the mindscape, much to Naruto's amusement, fully knowing that the Kyuubi just didn't want to show positive emotions. Combatant booth, Naruto-kun. Naruto's eyes snapped open hearing that feminine shout coming back to reality. Naruto looked to see everyone in the booth looking at him, but it was Susei that got to him through the soul link. Naruto-kun, it is your turn to fight. Susei repeatedly wondered what had happened to her partner, but that could be explained at a later time. Naruto looked down at the field to see Fu's teammate with a blue scar leering up at him, and Naruto's eyes narrowed. Naruto leaped down over the railing with Susei perched on his shoulder, something that didn't bother Naruto one bit. Naruto ignored the glare of the boy with a scarf around his deformed jaw in favor of a silent stoicism. Susei giggled through the link, seeing just how angry that their opponent was getting thanks to Naruto's cool persona. The proctor asked if Shiku was ready, earning an immediate nod, and when the same question came to Naruto, he just stared at the Taki-nin. The proctor took the silence as a yes and started the match and leapt away wanting to stay away from the Uchiha. Finally, I can pay you back for what you did to me back in that stupid tower. You thought you were so great, but all you did was catch me by surprise. That's why this time will be so different. This time you will be begging at my feet in front of the entire world. Shiku's arrogance wasn't muffled by the scarf that muffled his voice. Naruto shook his head as Shiku started to channel his chakra into his seals, but Naruto didn't move a muscle. Just before Shiku could finish the series of signs, Naruto looked over at Shiku with the cool blue eyes he had seen before. You're a fool. You think that I was lucky because I inspired fear in you? No, it was not luck that was the difference in our skills. You pose no threat even with any skills you may have acquired. Naruto spoke calmly, but the words cut into Shiku, getting the boy to even halt him just before it was complete. Get ready, Kyuubi, we are going with that. Naruto said mentally after using one of Itachi's favorite tactics to stall Shiku. Itachi had always used a fake arrogance to get into his enemy's head, but somewhere deep inside Naruto actually believed what he had said. Shiku growled at Naruto, who ignored in favor of creating 20 kg Bunshin without even using a hand sign. The shinobi in the crowd were all amazed that Naruto could split his chakra evenly 20 times without looking fatigued. The shadow clones surrounded Shiku in a tight circle, and Shiku tensed believing he was about to be attacked. The clones all dispelled at the same time, creating a massive wave of smoke to spread around the field. Naruto raced into the crowd with his cursed eyes active so he could see through the smokescreen. The crowd all waited to see just what was going to come from the smoke. Eventually the smoke cleared and an unharmed Shiku was standing in the middle of a complex array of symbols and kanji. Those in the crowd familiar with the art of sealing could see the words connect, mind, and imprison, but yet some of the things were still unreadable even to Minato, Jiraiya, and to a lesser extent Kushina. Naruto jumped back a few feet from the sealing array and held a single hand seal, channeling his chakra. Whirlpool Shadow Style. Gen Fuin Hybrid. Palace of Nightmares. The world around Shiku changed from the stadium to a replica of Konoha during the nighttime. Shiku looked around, and suddenly there was a large explosion, and multiple buildings caught fire, creating a large inferno. Shiku looked around in a panic as people started to run around in a crazed frenzy, confusing Shiku. That was when a massive shadow overtook the space he was standing in. Looking up, Shiku gulped. When he looked up, he was greeted by the massive stature of the Kyuubi grinning down manically at him. Shiku stumbled back a few feet before turning on his feet and sprinted off with the mass of Konoha citizens. The Kyuubi chuckled darkly and started to walk through the village, creating a massive amount of destruction. Shiku looked up hoping to find anything to save him, but all he saw was a dark sky. But this sky wasn't dark due to the night, no, it was darkened by the ash and smoke of a burning Konoha. He could feel his body physically expressing his fear through the cold sweat on his body and the hammering of his heart inside of his chest. Looking back only created a faster beating as he looked right into the red eyes of the Kyuubi as it got closer and closer, despite his terrified shouts for the monster of destruction to stop. Shiku allowed a smile to cross his face when he caught sight of the massive gates of Konoha, his escape just a few feet away. Just when he was about to escape the nightmarish hell, his body was suddenly forced back by an invisible force, knocking the teen down onto his rear. Shiku felt his throat go dry as he heard the monster's chuckle from behind him made his heart stop just a beat. Standing up, Shiku stumbled backwards, the invisible wall keeping him upright as the Kyuubi grinned evilly at the boy who hated demons and just how much he would enjoy this. The Kyuubi brought his paw forth and let it loom overhead, absolutely terrifying the boy beneath him. Then at an inhumane speed a single claw shot forward and impaled the boy through the stomach. Slowly the Kyuubi raised his claw, cutting Shiku in half, creating a massive puddle of blood and organs. As the world faded, Kyuubi's evil chuckle was the last sound in the nightmare world. Combat field. Naruto and the rest of the crowd watched as Shiku stood there in the middle of his glowing seal. Soon the crowd watched as a cold sweat became visible on his exposed skin that continued to get more intense. Then, to the shock of all those watching besides Naruto, Shiku fell over, spitting blood all over the seal on the ground. The crowd all went deathly silent as the proctor hurried over to the Taki teen. The expression on his face became grave when the teen's chest stopped rising. Standing up, the proctor faced the crowd with the same expression on his face. Winner by death, Naruto Namikaze Uzumaki Uchiha. Chapter 10. The Quarterfinals. Winner by death, Naruto Namikaze Uzumaki Uchiha. And there was absolute silence inside of the Chunin exam stadium as everyone looked down at Naruto, who was staring blankly at the corpse in front of him. Naruto waited for the seal to fade before he made his way to the booth for the remaining fighters, with Susei still perched happily on his shoulder. The civilians in the crowd, who were filled with bigotry, all sneered at the demon's display, while the neutral and pro-Naruto civilians just looked squeamish. The genin in the stadium looked down at the dead genin from Taki, mostly with a deep frown, as the reality of the ninja world hit them full force. The more seasoned shinobi, however, were very curious as to what Naruto had just pulled off, especially Kushina, who heard the name of the technique. As Naruto climbed the steps of the dark stairwell, he shook his head, but it wasn't clear whether it was in amusement or annoyance. "I believe you just caused me more problems with that fun of yours." Naruto spoke mentally, but there was no disdain or annoyance in his voice, something the Kyuubi noticed. Naruto did know that a certain orange-eyed girl did enjoy what the foolish Taki shinobi just went though. "Oh, but you told me that realm was where I had free reign and I decided to be the executioner. Anyways, that fleshy bag was nothing more than trash and demon hater." "Oh yes, I definitely enjoyed showing him a true demon." Naruto ignored the deep, almost a maniacal chuckle from his resident demon as he made his way back into the booth. Ignoring all the attention on him, Naruto made his way back to the rail. As Yujito passed, she gave Naruto a frown, probably not happy that he killed the boy. The reaction Naruto got from the Sun Jinchuriki was polar opposite. There was an approving gleam in those pale eyes of his. Naruto blinked his cool blue eyes when he felt someone standing next to him, but didn't say anything since he was not the one who wanted to talk. "What was that, Naruto-san? If you don't mind me asking." The voice he recognized as the Yuna girl from Iowa added on sheepishly when she realized it came out as a demand. Naruto looked at the diver helmet wearing Kunoichi with his eyebrow arched behind his hanging bang. It was a technique that belonged to the Uzumaki, but then again he doubted anyone in the exam could even replicate half of what was required to do the technique. That move uses the seal to trap an enemy within a different universe using mental energies. Whatever happens in this reality happens to the body in our reality. That kid died there, so he died out here. Naruto's voice was curt, and it brought shivers down the spines of each genin. Naruto smirked when he could see the effect his words had on his remaining competition. Mental warfare was just as important as physical. Naruto idly rubbed the back of Susei's neck with his finger as the proctor started the match between his fellow Jinchuriki. Combat field. Gara stood there with a small grin as his arms slowly unfurled from in front of his chest as he looked across at the blonde Kunoichi from Kumagakure. His mother had told him that this girl was just like he was. The auburn-haired Jinchuriki then knew that he had to measure his existence against this girl. Then when he proved that his existence was stronger than her blood would join the collection that saturated his sand. Then and only then could Gara say that he was alive and that no one could ever eliminate his existence. His existence would be validated by the blood of his foe. Weary would be a gross injustice on describing how Yujito was feeling at being around the mentally unstable genin from the hidden sand. Nibi had told her that the one tail was always a little unstable and was more than likely affecting the young shinobi. The bloodlust Gara was emanating was physically unnerving and the feeling only intensified when she got closer to the epicenter, Gara. Yujito could vividly remember how Gara tried to kill. No, exterminate each of his opponents thus far. Yujito didn't want to have to be put in the situation where she was at the mercy of the bloodthirsty Jinchuriki. Channeling the energy needed to her leg, Yujito struck first. Fire release. Extreme heat whip. Gara's bland eyes watched him passively as the stream of fire lashed towards him with murderous intent. Gara didn't bat an eye as his sand flew from his gourd and shielded the young man from the heat and burns that the attack would result in. The chakra infused in the sand kept the fire from turning the sand into glass, but Gara in his battle manic mode didn't care in the least. Once the sand cleared from the shield, Gara commanded it to rush forth to quell his craving for the red life liquid of his enemy, which the sand did faithfully. Yujito, much like the cat from hell sealed inside of her, hissed at her opponent's sand-based attack. Sliding back as the sand crashed down after her, Yujito replaced herself, leaving the sand to crush the log that took Yujito's place. Speeding forward, Yujito tried to send a sidekick towards Gara's head, but a wall of sand interfered. Hard reeling back, Yujito saved her shin from being turned to nothing as the sand attempted to grab her leg. Yujito frowned seeing just how formidable her opponent's defenses were. It was one thing to see it when he fought Lee, but it was another thing entirely to experience the sheer stopping power fist hand. The ground behind Gara, which was now firmly grinded into a fine powdery sand, was being manipulated by the youngest of the sand waterfall siblings for his next attack. Yujito watched as the sand was elevated into the sky above as the original sand went back to defend its owner. The cloud of sand formed overhead and small lumps started to form and project in the cloud. Sand drizzle. Then those lumps started to fall like small drops of rain drizzling on top of the blonde Jinchuriki. These small drops were much quicker and proved deadly when they cut into the ground. Growling, Yujito began the signs for her next and counter-move to the sand-styled rain cloud. Fire release. Hellcat stream. A small blue stream of fire shot out of Yujito's mouth, swallowing up the drizzling sand and continuing on towards the cloud lingering above. Yujito's blue eyes watched on as a few glass orbs dropped from her fire stream, shattering upon contact with the ground. The fire quickly swirled around the cloud, creating a blanket of glass that shined in the intense sunlight. Yujito leaped back to keep from being punctured by the falling, jagged glass, while Gara's sand just caught it and threw it at the wall, which was where the proctor happened to be making Genma leap away. The sand from Gara's personal stock formed into small shuriken in front of him, getting Yujito to tense in preparation for the upcoming barrage. The shuriken cut through the air with an alarming speed, catching off guard, which resulted in the cut she was now sporting on her cheek. Now aware of the velocity of the projectiles, Yujito made use of her flexibility to deftly weave through the deadly sand-based weaponry. Yujito growled slightly because Gara had only taken maybe a step this entire fight, while she had to be on the move almost constantly. That is indeed a fearsome defense. He doesn't even need to command it to defend like he needs to do for offense. Yujito's slitted eyes narrowed at Gara, trying to find some way to break through that absolute defense she had heard about. The blonde knew Taijutsu wouldn't be possible, since the sand would just crush any appendage that it would catch. Jinjutsu, while a viable option to defeat Gara and his tunnel vision, was out of reach because of her status as a Jinchuriki. She didn't know Fuinjutsu like Naruto, so that left her with ninjutsu. Fire release. Spindle flames. A small jet of fire came from Yujito's mouth, spinning until it hit its point where it speared out right towards the sand defense. Gara didn't even show any worry as a wall of sand went up in front of him, stopping the flames a few feet short of hitting him. Gara's eyes widened momentarily when he saw the sand glow, but the Sunanin quickly acted by reinforcing the sand before it could be destroyed. The sand filtered away so Yujito could see the grin Gara was wearing, getting her to raise an eyebrow out of curiosity. Hitten gets down. Not questioning her companion, Yujito dropped to all fours like a cat, and not a moment later the shuriken she dodged earlier came flying over her. The sand shuriken kept on going until it reached the auburn-haired boy's sand, where it harmlessly formed back into the mother source. Yujito got back onto her feet and wiped the small amount of sweat that adorned her brow, while Gara just looked on with a slight frown. In the stands, man, they haven't even spoken all that much, and this is so damn intense. Kiba shouted, wiping his brow with his sleeve, getting a nod from his teammates and a yelp of agreement from his ninja hound partner. Kiba may be gung-ho when it came to proving himself, but in this case he was glad that he wasn't fighting. "Kiba, what did I say about your language?" Kurenai scolded her loud-mouthed student, getting him to shrink under her disapproving glare and gulp nervously. Having lived with a rough mother and elder sister, Kiba learned a healthy fear of women. "Man, am I glad I gave up fighting after that Chijiro match. It would be too troublesome." Shikamaru drawled out with a sigh as he watched on as the clouds just drifted on by, ignoring the glare from his blonde teammate, but decided not to say anything, referring to a certain troublesome blonde. "Shika, why can't you be more like Ino's?" Insult and comparison was cut off by an annoyed Shikamaru who took his eyes from the clouds to snap towards the Yamanaka next to him. "Like your Sasuke? He got beat in the first round easily." Shikamaru asked with a slight distaste in his mouth and the mention of the village's most arrogant genin, getting a small chuckle from Choji, who pulled out another bag of chips too much on while he watched the competition proceed. Ino frowned at her lazy friend but couldn't dispute that Sasuke did get beat pretty severely in everything he was thought to be good at. That brought up another question in her mind, and that was just who Naruto really was. Because it was clear that no one in the stadium knew just what Naruto was capable of. Combatant booth. Naruto watched his fellow Jinchuriki with his analytic blue eyes as they traded with no one coming on top. While Yujito had the speed and flexibility to avoid Gaara's, Gaara had the pure stopping power to keep Yujito from gaining an advantage. But he knew Gaara was expelling less energy than Yujito was because he had moved less and his sand seemed to act on its own, possibly sentient. Yet the scorned shinobi knew that neither would run out of energy soon, seeing as they were both Jinchuriki. "They look pretty even." Narumi said aloud, watching the two shinobi going back and forth with them. The only real damage were the few superficial cuts from Gaara's sand shuriken, but those had since closed up. Naomi seemed to agree with her if the nodding she was doing was anything to indicate her opinion. "No, it seems Yujito-san is at a disadvantage here." Haku's soft voice got the attention of the shinobi in the booth sans Naruto. "Well, it may seem like they are, even Yujito has been forced to use a lot more energy, while Gaara hasn't even been forced to take a step back." A look of realization crossed the faces of most of the genin as they thought back on the fight so far. "Well, this should be interesting then." Yuna added with a small amount of excitement in her calm voice. Combat field. Yujito shot forward with her claws extended so that she wouldn't have to risk being sucked in by Gaara's sand. Swaying to the left and shuffling her feet, Yujito avoided a burst of sand Gaara sent after her. Only a few feet from reaching her opponent, Yujito lunged forward, but Gaara's sand countered and swallowed her wrist before she could try and carve through the grains of sand. "Nibi, I need your chakra around my arm before he shatters it." Yujito called out, mentally getting the immediate response of a red cloak of Yakai. Using the small boost in strength granted by the malevolent energy, Yujito wrenched her hand free and skid backwards. Gaara's brow furrowed as yet again the nuisance across from him refused to forfeit her existence. Gaara called on all of his personal reserve of sand and mixed it with the ground below him, multiplying the amount of sand he had at his command. Gaara moved his hands forward and the wave of sand slowly crawled forward. Infinite sand tsunami. The crowd was in awe at the magnitude of the young Jinchurikis as it threatened to crash down on Yujito. Yujito turned around and ran as fast as she could muster towards the far wall of the stadium. Getting close enough, Yujito leaped high onto the wall and stuck to the surface with chakra on the soles of her feet. The dull roar of the sand crashing on the ground drowned out any of the small sounds coming from cheering or clapping crowd members. Yujito watched from the safety of the wall as the sand washed up and slammed into the wall beneath her, sending a strong vibration through her body. Slowly the sandy powder sank back into the solid part of the ground, letting Yujito know that it was always lingering just below. Yujito flexed her hands and reinforced her claws with some chakra, making sure they were strong enough for her next move, because if they weren't then she would be left in a compromising situation. Channeling some extra chakra to her legs, Yujito kicked off of the wall and towards Gaara, with her claws together in front of her head. Spiraling claw. Yujito's whole body began to spin clockwise, with each spin the speed behind her body increased as did the speed of the spin. The claws linked up with each other to form one white torpedo-like tip that was aimed and bearing down on Gaara. The sand shield was quick enough to bring itself to Gaara's defense, but the power and velocity behind the spin tore through the shield. Yujito grinned when she felt her claws digging into Gaara, but her celebratory grin was cut off when she heard a dark chuckle from Gaara. Yujito looked up and her eyes went from confident to alarm when she saw she only managed to break into Gaara's sand armor. The sand Yujito broke through swarmed violently on each side of the Kumagakure Kinwaichi and suddenly slammed into each side of her. Thankfully for Yujito, she managed to avoid the painful experience by flipping back and out of the close range of Gaara and his sand. Panting slightly, Yujito got back to her feet, watching as the sand near Gaara's heart fell away, long after doing its job of absorbing the impact of her last attack. As infuriating as it was, Yujiro could admit silently that maybe there was something to calling Gaara's techniques the absolute defense. However, the Kunoichi knew now was not the time to admire an enemy she was currently in combat with. Gaara was reading his next move when he heard the voice that chilled his blood every time it spoke. "Gaara, what is taking so long to kill her?" An angry voice bellowed out inside of the auburn-haired Sunanin's head, making his eyes get a few more degrees cooler. "I'm going to kill her mother, just please be patient. It won't take much longer." Gaara's usual dark voice sounded nothing more like a child seeking acceptance. Gaara was able to stop from cringing when he heard a deep scoff from the recesses of his mind. Gaara waited what seemed to be a millennia before he got a response from his mother. "Gaara, you don't want to make me angry, your mother, but that's okay because you can use my power to kill this nuisance. Just like always." The voice sent a very disturbing coup to its container, but Gaara's mind was too distorted to be unnerved by this. Instead he grinned because it was finally time to prove just why he existed. The sand that swirled around Gaara suddenly came to a halt and hardened around Gaara, forming a cocoon around the boy. Just as the dome was about to close, the last thing Yujiro could see was Gaara's sickening grin. Then inside of the sphere of sand, Gaara's chakras started to get more potent and more demonic, getting some alarm bells to go off inside of the two tails head. "Hidden, you need to give up and do it now before he can transform." Yujiro's blue eyes widened in shock hearing that Gaara planned on transforming. "But even if I can't handle two tails of yokai, I can still manage one just like he can, shouldn't that be enough?" Yujiro asked because she trained with her sensei B just so she could call upon Anibi as a hidden ace, and this would seem like the perfect time to call on that little extra. Yujiro frowned when she felt Anibi shake her head negatively, but she would wait for an explanation. "Hidden, if you maximize the amount of the second tail of yokai you would transform into my body. That is what that boy is doing now. And a full-blown Shukaku is much stronger than your one-tail state. This is a losing fight." The two tails informed her container regretfully since she knew just how much she wanted to prove herself, but she wouldn't let Yujiro get killed because of a need for validation. Yujiro nodded her head and looked over to Genma and raised her hand to get his attention, which she did. "I give up. You might want to stop, Proctor-san." Yujiro warned the Leaf Jonin before she used a shunshin to get to the stands where the rest of her team was staying. "Gaara, that is enough, the match is over." A deep booming voice came down from the higher echelon of the Chunin exam stadium, getting the sand to freeze any movement. Gaara's sand slowly retreated into his gourd, and Gaara glared up at his father before disappearing in a sand shunshin. Combatant booth. The sand shunshin that filled the booth signaled the arrival of the victorious combatant from Kei's no Kuni. The remaining genin wasted no time in giving Gaara a wide berth out of fear or caution. Gaara looked over to see that the only one to not move was Naruto, who didn't even seem bothered by his presence. It was different from anything Gaara had ever experienced and it confused him. Ignoring his emotions, Gaara walked over and stood between Naruto and the wall without so much as a word. Narumi was glancing towards her brother, slightly worried by how close he was to the dangerous entity from Sunagakure. The blonde daughter of the Hokage shook off her concern in favor of silently cheering for sister as she made her way down to fight the Kunoichi from Iwagakure. The girl had proven herself to be proficient with water-style ninjutsu as well as in the field of genjutsu. The girl was a serious Kunoichi and would prove to be a strong challenge for her sister. Though she was also trying to come up with a way to combat Haku, who proved she was very capable as well. Narumi sighed because the path to Chunin was clearly not an easy one. Tajiro was also thinking about his next fight against Naruto. One would think that having dueled with each other once already would help, but there was the game changer. The Sharingan. The duel in Nami no Kuni was just a duel between swordsmen, but this next fight would be between ninja swordsmen, and he knew it. He would give it his best shot, of course, but the blue-haired teen had to wonder if it would be enough against the renowned power of the Uchiha clan. Chijiro subconsciously went to reach for the hilt of his Hiramekure, but caught himself at the last moment and got ready to watch the next match. Naruto was silently creating an inventory of the dwindling number of opponents that were left in the tournament. There was the indomitable Jinchuriki from Suna, his sisters, the mystery girl from Iwa, a ninja swordsman from the Hidden Mist, and an ice release user. Each opponent had their strengths just like they had their weaknesses. While Naruto didn't care who won this next match, he did hope to learn more about Yuna's capabilities, and who better than his more tenacious sister to do that. Naruto closed his eyes for a moment before opening them again, revealing his Sharingan alive and spinning. Naruto didn't believe in copying ninjutsu just like Itachi, but it did help in dissecting and understanding, thus helping to find the weakness. Combat field. Naomi looked to Yuna with a beaming smile as she bounced on the heels of her feet, and the Chunin around her could feel the excitement rolling off of her. Yuna too was hoping for another fight with a serious Kunoichi, just like her last fight with Fu. "I hope we can have a good fight, Yuna-san. Because then when I win it will be all the more impressive," Naomi said with a cheeky grin, getting a small chuckle from the Iwa Kunoichi. It was the same thing Yuna was thinking, so she couldn't find it in her to call out the confidence behind that statement. I was thinking the same, but of course I don't plan on losing here either. I want to keep going and win the whole thing. Yuna said with her own bravado coming through, getting an understanding nod from her excitable opponent. It was then that both fighters knew that they would be in for an excellent fight because neither would be giving in easily. It didn't have to be a fight to the death like the one only 2 matches ago, but it was going to be a tough one that would make both Kunoichi stronger in the end. It was their kind of fight. Having enough with the pre-fight banter, Naomi went through a series of signs at a moderate speed, ending on the ram sign with a small smirk. Wind release. Godly wind from the mountain. A vortex of wind blasted forth from Naomi's hand straight towards Yuna, who was too close to the Namikaze Uzumaki to avoid it. Biting down on her tongue, Yuna brought her forearms up to take most of the damage from the sudden wind attack. Naomi lowered herself into her defensive taijutsu stance, fully anticipating a counter-strike from Yuna. Yuna, getting into a readied stance of her own, glared at Naomi for getting the first strike in. Taking a handful of shuriken, Yuna flicked her wrist in an effortless motion, sending a wave of black spinning stars. Naomi scoffed and waved her palm, sending the trajectory of each shuriken off track, just enough to make them miss comfortably. Naomi blocked a fist from Yuna with her forearms and ducked the follow-up kick aimed at her head. Using her lowered stance, Naomi drove the point of her elbow into Yuna's gut, but the attack was easily batted away by Yuna. With her balance slightly disturbed, Naomi didn't have the chance of blocking a knee strike to her ribsage, making her groan slightly. Naomi replied with a quick hook towards Yuna's throat, but Yuna was quicker and slid away from her opponent, creating space between the two. Yuna gave a small smirk of her own as she began to go through her signs. Poison release. Cloud of toxins. Yuna's mouth spewed a ghastly cloud of purple smoke that the air currents carried towards a startled Naomi, who hadn't seen a technique like that before. Naomi leaped back, but the cloud of poison continued to steadily make progress towards her. Naomi really did not wish to test the limits of her lungs by holding her breath, so she needed to clear the air. The Konoha princess's hands, ending with the snake seal, took a firm stance as a strong squall blew over Naomi's shoulders and hit the cloud of poison head-on. The upward current of wind knocked the cloud poison into the sky overhead, where the chakra-infused wind scattered the poison harmlessly into the atmosphere, where it became too diluted to be effective. Naomi took a moment to sigh in relief, since that stuff looked pretty nasty to her. Despite having the yin half of the Kyuubi's chakra, there was no intelligent conscience to use the chakra and filter out the poison if she ingested any of it. You did good to keep the poison away from your lungs, but how would you stop this technique, I wonder? Poison release. Venomous serpent. Instead of the cloud of purple smoke, this time a purple liquid formed the body of what ended up being a menacing snake. Naomi took a step back at the sight of the poisonous snake, opening its mouth, literally baring its fangs. Coiling around Yuna, the snake hissed, then lunged at Naomi, who brought her hand up into the clone seal, creating a cage buncheon that saved Naomi by throwing her off to the side and out of the range of the snake's jaw. What do I need to do to kill that thing? It probably can form back if its body is made of a liquid, and that is a problem. I guess I can try this. Creating 3 more shadow clones, Naomi had them put their hands near the side of its body while it tried to reform its head. The 3 clones started to redo the first step of wind manipulation, but using the snake's body instead of a leaf. It took a few moments even with 3 clones, but eventually a clean cut appeared down the center of the poison snake, leaving the 2 halves to splash down on the ground. The 3 clones then dispelled with pleased grins on their faces. Yuna raised one of her eyebrows when she saw her snake just split down the center. Ignoring her confusion, Yuna held her last sign and channeled some chakra, and the snake started to reform. Naomi appeared behind Yuna and kicked the Iwa Kunoichi straight in the back, sending her crashing forth, releasing her hold on the. Naomi grinned at Yuna when she got up and sent a glare her way. Yuna rubbed the swell of her back before dropping back into a more alert posture. Yuna was glad that Naomi had not disappointed her by not providing a challenge, because this was what she came here for. Oh, I was totally right about you having a good fight. After my first fight I wasn't sure what to expect after fighting that Odo girl, but you and Fu have really made this trip worth it. Yuna said happily as she rolled her left shoulder with a large grin. Yuna, taking a few moments to take a breather, which Naomi did as well, looked back at her opponent. The feeling is mutual. I haven't had this good of a fight since I had an intense spar with my sister after our first air rank mission. Naomi admitted, cracking her knuckles with an excited grin plastered on her face. Her violet eyes were alive with happiness and an intense determination. She wouldn't lose because this was just too much of a fun battle for it to end with a loss. Combatant booth. Naruto watched on keenly as Yuna created her poison, noting how she changed the state from gas to liquid seamlessly. It was different from the few people he had encountered with poison release, who just stuck to using it as a cloud of smoke, but then again they didn't call it the poison release. If anything, Naruto was glad that Naomi forced more information out of Yuna because it was slowly making the picture all the more clear. Narumi tightened her grip on the railing as she watched her sister avoid the hazardous snake of poison by using her cage buncheon. Her lips twitched up into a smile when she used her training in splitting a leaf to cut the serpent in half, giving her time to strike at Yuna. Her worry was washed away when her sister's eager attitude came back full force even in the middle of her fight despite the danger. Aku glanced down to see how the snake was consisting of a liquid substance that made the ice wielder wonder if she could possibly freeze that liquid. Then there was Naomi who was using wind that could possibly cut through her ice mirrors now that she actually had some training in the element. Just like Samui's storm element was dangerous but was beatable because of Haku's advantage in wind over lightning. Ara looked down at the two fighting in the arena and was making plans on how to kill them should either of them end up fighting him. Their blood, no matter whose it was, would run across his sand because both he and his mother were tired of being denied the blood they craved, the blood that would validate them. Naruto shook his head when Susei asked him who he thought would win since unlike others Naruto would refuse to jump to conclusions on a blind faith. He didn't have the proper information on either of the fighters, so any judgment was reserved for a later time in the future. Combat field. Naomi flowed her chakra to her right hand creating a small blue chakra flame, but that was just the way the chakra showed it was present. An exact copy of Naomi came into existence and started to claw the space over the energy, randomly compressing into a spiraling sphere of chakra. The citizens of Konohagakure cheered seeing one of their princesses using the fable of their beloved Hokage, not that Naomi or Minato really cared for their praise after their ugly display on day 2. Naomi grinned and burst off her back foot, accelerating quickly enough to close the distance between her and Yuna. Rasengan. Naomi drove the spiraling ball of pure chakra into Yuna, driving her into the ground with a powerful force. The ground exploded behind the powerful blast, knocking dust and rocks into the air around Naomi, hiding her from view. When the smoke cleared, Naomi was on the ground with her palm inside of a crater created by the powerful technique. Naomi sighed and ran a hand through her vibrant red locks looking around for Yuna. Getting back onto her feet, Naomi turned around and was looking at a smirking Yuna who showed no signs of damage from the spiraling sphere of chakra. Phew, that was a close one. You almost got me because I froze seeing your father, but then again I had time because it wasn't in a flash. Lucky me. Yuna muttered sarcastically as she brushed off her shoulders, ignoring the small glare from Naomi for brushing off her most damaging technique. Yuna, seeing the glare she was on the receiving end of, waved her hand shooing away the glare without much of a thought. Don't be like that. I am only being honest. Seriously, why is everyone so tense in things like this? Yuna asked with a small sigh as Naomi didn't relent with her glare. I can tell you really want to shut me up, so why don't you come and try it? Yuna goaded Naomi with a cheeky grin, getting a growl from her red-headed opponent. Yuna didn't have to wait long as Naomi rushed forward with her fist cocked back, ready to do harm to Yuna. Yuna easily leaned back, avoiding the fist thrown at her neck, but was blindsided by a kick to the ribs, making her wince from the jarring impact. Yuna slammed her elbow against the shin of Naomi, making her cry out in pain and retract her shin. Naomi twirled around and threw 3 punches into the ribs on the other side of Yuna's body with a ferocious intensity. Hissing in pain at the first few punches, Yuna turned to face Naomi and caught her fist smashing her helmet against Naomi's head, taking advantage of her headwear. Naomi stumbled back a few steps and would have fallen over if Yuna wasn't holding her up by the arm so that she could deliver a rising strike to her gut. Naomi lurched forward, gasping as the air left her lung. Not wanting to be a punching bag, Naomi stomped on Yuna's foot, making her leg buckle under the pain. Naomi took her opponent from Iwagakure's wrist and twisted it, making her cry out in pain, thus freeing her own arm. Each Kunoichi took a pause to nurse the sore areas on their bodies from their opponent's strikes during the hand-to-hand exchange. Naomi wondered what she could use to put down Yuna because aside from her playground of the twister, but that would take too long to set up and Yuna wouldn't give her the time she would need. The Rasengan was an option for a quick knockout, but she would need to use a distraction. Her Yuna could easily avoid the wide motion of the chakra sphere. Well, I need a distraction, so I guess I will need to use some shadow clones. Yuna, whose hands were resting on her sides, also was going over how she could end this fight before she had to use more chakra. It was clear that Naomi had a counter to both her poison and water release by utilizing the wind element's cutting properties. Sighing in disappointment, Yuna brought her hands up to the tubes that had green liquid flowing through them lodged in the docking ports in her helmet. Twisting them free, she pointed the ends towards Naomi, who had stopped just before she had to make a quick dash to avoid whatever Yuna was planning. Flaring her chakra, the poison release user sent the green liquid shooting from the tubes towards Naomi. Acid release. Abrasive imprisonment. The acidic liquid quickly formed into a circular dome-like jail cell that surrounded Naomi, keeping her in place, glancing around hurriedly for a means to escape. The green liquid dropped onto the ground, instantly killing any grass that it came in contact with. You should be very careful in Namikaze, and any drop from the acid will burn straight to the bones. Yuna's sing-song voice caught the attention of her prisoner. True to her word, a small drip landed on her ninja sandal and slowly began eating at the fabric. Acting quickly, Naomi removed the shoe before the acid hit her skin. Naomi thought about blasting the acidic structure with her wind but then realized that it would spread the acid and possibly hit her body, which most certainly would be fatal. Naomi saw the drops were getting larger and more frequent, meaning she didn't have time to formulate a plan. Sighing softly, Naomi raised her voice so that she could be heard. "I forfeit." Yuna nodded her head approvingly and the acidic structure lost its chakra and it slowly lost its green hue till it was just water. Naomi let out a relieved breath and stepped over the puddle of water towards Yuna, where they shook hands with a promise to fight once more, of course under more friendly circumstances. Winner by forfeit, Yuna. Page Booth. That was an excellent match if I must say so. Came the proud voice of the wise elderly Earth Shadow, who saw no reason to try and hide his nationalistic pride, seeing how one of his own beat one of the Yellow Flash's daughters in Konoha. Closing his eyes, that Tsuchikage nodded his head in agreement with his own statement. Tsuchikage Dono, may I ask for you to explain what the acid release is? I mean, you did have me explain young Kakujo's abilities. Mei finished with a polite smile as she looked over towards her peer from the land of Earth. The Tsuchikage grumbled, cursing his own curiosity, but found no harm in some gloating. Yuna's father came from the clan of poison release users here in Hai no Kuni. He settled within our village and married a Jounin woman who had a fairly powerful water affinity. The two genetics linked where the ratio of poison to water ended up creating the acid release. The Tsuchikage gave the bare minimum of the story, not finding the need to tell them that Yuna was not in a clan. It wouldn't hurt to let his peers believe that there were more acid release users living in Iwagakure. Minato released a small sigh, clearly disappointed that his daughter had lost, but was glad that she was unharmed. A victory or a loss meant nothing if the safety of his daughter came into question. It looks like Naomi just ran into an unknown factor that she couldn't adapt to. Irakage grunted in agreement with his rival for the title of fastest shinobi as he looked on, barely paying attention, since he no longer had the proverbial horse in the race. Irakage glanced over to the blonde Hokage with a small smirk. Yes, your daughters are quite skilled, just like that son of yours. At least those two just don't kill helpless genin. Irakage took a small shot at Minato, hoping to rile him up. Sadly for the Kazukiage added his opinion into the idle chatter before Minato could give his response to his words. You call him a killer, but I call him a shinobi. The Kazukiage said with his perpetual scowl. The Wind Shadow was impressed that Naruto at his age was able to go to such extents. Leaving opponents alive often led to enemies and regrets in the future. Minato chuckled at A's disgruntled expression, clearly not appreciating the timing of the Kazukiage's interjection. Combat field. It seems we have to do combat once more, Narumi-san. Haku's soft voice was friendly, seeing as how the fighting had yet to start. Haku kept Snowfall on her hip because she knew that she was going to be in a long-range fight where her blade would be of no use. Rushing in with a sword to force her style on Narumi would also lead to a quick defeat. That is Haku-san. At least this time it isn't a fight to the death because of a scummy businessman though. Narumi added with a soft chuckle, remembering just how money could change the dynamics of everything. Money could even put those in a position of power and a bind by someone who otherwise would hold no influence. I think it is time we start our match. Haku's friendly visage turned more frigid going into her hunter nin persona, getting Narumi to become more serious as well. Reaching into her pouch and arming herself with needles, Haku wasted no time in flinging them at Narumi. Already familiar with Haku's weapon of choice, instead of trying to deflect the needles, Narumi used a shunshin to appear on Haku's left side. Haku whirled around and watched as Narumi pushed forward with a kunai in each of her hands, obviously ready to use them. Narumi raised each kunai ready to bury them in each of Haku's shoulders. Haku stomped her foot on the ground, kicking up the water puddle left over by Yuna into the air, forming a shield cylinder around her. Water release. Water pulse. Narumi cried out in surprise as her body was pushed back by the water, sending her tumbling to the ground. Getting back to her feet no longer armed with her kunai, Narumi looked up to see Haku looking at her coldly as she growled. Narumi recalled her battle in Nami no Kuni with Haku and knew that if she got caught in the ice mirrors, she would be in trouble. Shaking her head, Narumi focused back on the present. Water release. Water javelin. Narumi made use of the water already provided using her chakra, using the water to make a deadly javelin. With a flick of the wrist, the javelin sped forward towards Haku, and when it looked like it would hit her, the ice release user jumped back into an ice mirror that she created to make a quick escape. Narumi tensed seeing the reflection of Kiri Kunoichi in the mirror like she was the first time in Nami. Slowly the upper half of Haku's frame came out of the mirror as needles of water levitated in front of her. Ice needles of death. The needles of water quickly froze over, creating deadly ice needles that Narumi knew all too well. The frozen needles flew towards Narumi, who tried to roll out of their path, but the speed behind the projectiles was too great, leaving a few needles stuck in her arm. Hissing to herself, Narumi pulled the needles out of her arm, throwing them to the ground where they shattered into an icy dust that would be quite beautiful if they hadn't tried to kill her moments prior. Cracking her neck, Narumi regarded the ice kunoichi with a heated glare, not happy being a pincushion. Aku propelled out of the ice mirror towards Narumi, throwing an open palm strike at Konohanin's neck. Narumi managed to maneuver herself so that the blow only hit her shoulder, providing minor discomfort. Narumi manipulated her hair to wrap around Haku's waist, pulling her into an uppercut delivered to Haku's delicate jaw. Haku's head snapped backwards, then she was slammed into the earth below the two by Narumi's blonde hair. Just when Narumi thought Haku to be incapacitated, the fake hunter Nin launched the soles of her feet into Narumi's stomach, sending Kunoichi into the air. Haku jumped away, creating space as Narumi landed back on her feet, holding her stomach with a small glare. The two Kunoichi continued their silent standoff. Aku threw another handful towards Narumi with frightening accuracy, striking Narumi in spots that disabled her left arm. Another handful were lodged into the blonde's right leg, dropping her to a knee. Haku put away the other that she planned on using in case her aim was off. Walking up to Narumi, Haku gave her a hopeful smile as she got closer. "I would recommend that you give up, Narumi-san, this way so I won't have to hurt you any further." Haku advised him not to want to cause any lasting damage to the kunoichi in front of her. "Oh, you mean this? This is nothing really," Narumi said with a labored chuckle as if she hadn't had 20 or so sticking out of her body. Haku frowned at what she perceived to be useless stubbornness. Each of the needles struck chakra points and nerves to shut down the muscles in her arm and leg. Not saying another word, Narumi held a hand sign and closed her eyes to enhance her concentration. Soon a faint red glow wavered off of the Hokage's daughter as tapped into the yang chakra of the Kyuubi, healing all of her minor nerve pinches and chakra points. Haku, who still was unaware of what Narumi was doing, was left vulnerable to the sudden uppercut and jarring kick that sent her tumbling away with a cry of pain. Haku looked into the sky, her face crunching up in pain as she gently rubbed the bruise she felt on her delicate jaw. Narumi stood there with a victorious smirk on her face as she waited for Haku to get back on her feet. Haku looked over at Narumi with her brows furrowed and a confused expression on her face. Narumi ignored this in favor of smirking at the girl and running her hand through her hair, enjoying the confusion on Haku's face. Now what was that about this being over? In the stands, "Oh, Narumi-chan." Kushina and Naomi both shouted in the same exuberant voice as they stood on their feet cheering for their family member to come out victorious in her fight. It was clear to the other Konoha genin just who Naomi took after leaving her parents. Kakashi just smiled and smiled at Namikaze Uzumaki's. I and Lee were both looking at the two shouting women with fiery expressions, both spandex-wearing shinobi clenching their fists. Tenten and Niji both inches away, already knowing what was coming from their teammate and sensei. "Gosh, they are both so youthful, guy-sensei." Lee cried out passionately, getting an equally positive response from the youthful jounin. Narumi has gotten a lot stronger since the mission to Wave. Before, not even the three of them could really harm Haku-san, but now she can hold her off all on her own. Sakura commented, seeing just how much her teammate had grown over the past few months. It also fueled her desire to train more with Shizune and Tsunade once her arm was healed up efficiently. Jiraiya, who was still lingering around the top ring of the stadium, was glancing down towards his goddaughter with pride gleaming in his eyes, but was still watching each and every mistake she was making so that they could begin to correct what could be exploited. But let it be said that the white-haired man still really wanted to perform his research. Combat field, Narumi and Haku both were slouching slightly as they tried to catch their breath after another intense exchange between the two. Narumi was thinking just what she needed to do to catch the speedy kunoichi, while Haku was wondering what she had that was strong enough to put down Narumi. Both decided they needed more time and lunged forward, throwing a fist, but one strike was blocked by the other's fist, creating a slight cracking noise. Both girls winced and leapt backwards, trying to shake the feeling back into their fists. Taking a deep breath, both girls knew that any more taijutsu would be a pointless endeavor. Narumi started to gather her chakra to call on her next move, which she hoped would catch Haku, disabling her. Going through the seals needed to form the she would use for her next move. Water release. Water dragon. The dragon released a watery roar that sounded like a deep gargle before speeding forward to trap Haku within its maw. Narumi eased herself onto one knee, watching as her watery creation was brought forward with a driving force. Haku gasped and used a shunshin at the last possible moment, making the dragon splash into the ground, losing its head. Haku came back into Narumi's vision on the other end of the stadium, with her eyes half glaring at the dragon as it formed back and went back to swing behind Narumi's back. Haku ignored the intimidating sight as she went through her own hand signs at a furious pace in an attempt to protect herself. Hyoten. Tundra dragon. Much like Narumi's water dragon, a light blue dragon made of ice started to be crafted behind Haku's back. The dragon howled, forcing an icy breath up into the sky, making the spectators on the rail shiver from the temperature drop. The Ice Princess locked eyes with one of Konoha's guardian princesses, both showing a tremendous amount of determination in their respective eyes. The water dragon released a watery growl which the ice dragon responded with another chilling roar. Whereas the water dragon's movement was followed by a swish, the ice dragon's body scratched on itself. Both dragons launched from their coiled positions at the same time, rushing for a collision in the center of the field. Just when it looked as if there would be a tremendous collision, the more agile water dragon spiraled around the ice dragon, continuing on towards Haku, leaving the ice dragon on a straight beeline for Narumi. There were simultaneous crashes as each dragon slammed into the wall opposite of them, shrouding the impact site in a wall of smoke. The crowd held their breath as they waited for the field to clear to see who won the final collision. When the smoke cleared, there was a collective gasp as both Narumi and Haku were lying on their chests unconscious. The Kumo Kunoichi, who was the proctor of the match, checked on both of them before signaling for the medics to come onto the field. Clearing her throat, she raised both of her arms into the air, getting the audience to quiet down. The match ends in a draw. Combatant booth. Naruto rolled his shoulders, getting annoyed by a call from Susei, which made him roll his eyes that were still burning with the Sharingan. Once the combat field was cleared away, Naruto walked past the other three people in the booth and down the staircase. Chijiro watched Naruto disappear and gulped silently because he could feel the intensity radiating off of the Hokage's son. Steeling himself, the blue-haired swordsman followed after his fellow swordsman ready to do battle. Yuna, who was pretty much recovered from her fight with Naomi, glanced over to the other end of the booth where Gaara stood. The acid release user stood on guard since it was just she and Gaara, and the Jinchuriki was clearly unstable and could attack her at any moment. Just great, they had to knock each other out last match and leave me alone with the psychopath. Gaara paid absolutely no mind to the Kunoichi who was sharing the booth with him, instead keeping his gaze firmly on Naruto. The auburn-haired boy didn't know what it was about Naruto that put him at ease, but now Naruto would be able to prove himself in this match by winning. That was the only acceptable result in Gaara's mind. Show me Uzumaki. Combat field. The Tomo in Naruto's eyes spun about in a circular cycle as he reached back and readied Twilight for the battle. Chijiro tightened his hold on Hiramekure as he was lulled into a comfort, but remembering the stage, Chijiro shook away the fog. Naruto was already upon him with his katana coming down over the top of Chijiro's shoulder. Chijiro hurled Hiramekure up to fend off Naruto's smaller blade. Not wanting to be thrown off of his center of balance, Naruto spun his body with the momentum. The gray hue of Twilight filled Chijiro's vision before it fell down to his waist. Chijiro suddenly grimaced when he felt the flesh on his stomach being dug into by the sharp end of his opponent's katana. Chijiro jabbed the pommel of his twin sword into Naruto's shoulder, getting the space he wanted so he could reassess the situation. Chijiro was confused as to why he was sluggish enough for Naruto to draw blood on such an obvious move. Chijiro jumped up and brought his massive sword down on the position Naruto was in, but to no avail, as the using shinobi easily maneuvered himself out of the linear motion. Chijiro slashed out backwards, sending the side of his blade on a direct line towards Naruto, who calmly put Twilight up vertically and braced for impact. Naruto could feel the force being absorbed by his forearms, and knowing his guard couldn't keep the larger sword at bay, he flipped over the swinging blade. While upside down traveling through the air, Naruto slashed at Chijiro's head with his katana with frightening accuracy. Chijiro dipped his head to the side, watching as the gray blade swept past his face, while Naruto landed back on the ground. As Chijiro turned, he saw a few locks of his blue hair falling to the ground, confusing the Kiri swordsman. With his apparent problems on the defensive, Chijiro lunged forward with his Hiramekure pointed at Naruto, ready to stab the Konohan in. Naruto moved to the left, evading the lunging blade, timing his hip check so that as Chijiro passed him, his hip slammed into his ribsage. Chijiro winced and landed on a wobbly base, distracted by the sudden attack. Chijiro lifted his glasses back over his eyes as he charged Hiramekure with his chakra, getting the sword to glow a deep blue. Symptom. Chakra slash. The blue wave of chakra was magnified by the sword, which acted as a conduit. Naruto knew that he would not be able to sever the wave due to the strengthening from the sword. Naruto speared Twilight into the ground and jumped on the hilt of his sword, putting him on an even level with the wave of chakra. Just before the wave could hit him, Naruto used his katana as a stepping stone, jumping high into the air over the chakra slash. Chijiro looked up into the sky, using his hand to block the sunlight from blinding him. Naruto used the sun to make his figure a shadowy silhouette, also forcing Chijiro to deal with the blinding light of the sun. Naruto's hands blurred through their signs, ending on the sign of the tiger. Naruto molded the chakra in his lungs, harnessing the burning feeling that was coursing through his body, funneling it up his throat. Fire release. Grand Fireball. The compacted sphere of dark orange and deep red came flying down on Chijiro, who could only see a dark circle coming closer. The shadow broke, allowing Chijiro to see the steaming fireball, getting him to leap away from the spot he was sparing himself from a fiery combustion. The moment Naruto landed, his hand was already wrapped around the hilt of his katana, pulling it out of the ground. Naruto raced towards Chijiro, who was still on his back foot from leaping away from the ball of fire. Chijiro continued tracking backwards as he went through his own hand signs. Water release. Water bullet. Chijiro cried, shooting a chakra-infused glob of water towards the pursuing Naruto, using his aggressiveness to his advantage. Naruto did not falter in his stride, channeling fine coating of wind-style chakra around his katana, and with a fluid upward cut, he split the water bullet in two. Naruto continued forward, then in mid-step Naruto disappeared with no sign of a natured Shunshin, showing how far he had come from using Shisui scrolls he got on his birthday. Chijiro whirled around, slashing behind him, where he was met with a loud crunch. Glancing down, Chijiro found the remains of a substitution log, showing that his instincts were indeed true. Naruto was standing a few feet across from Chijiro, with his eyes narrowed on the blue-haired swordsman from Mizuno Kuni. Naruto took out a handful of shuriken and threw them into the air, going into a series of hand seals. Fire release. Phoenix Age fire. Naruto spat out a series of small fireballs that surrounded the shuriken, using his chakra to manipulate the flight of the spinning stars. Chijiro held Hiramekure in front of his body horizontally, creating a shield from the fiery shuriken, using chakra to keep the fires from expanding and exploding in his face. Once the shuriken were resting against the metal of his twin sword, he swung his sword, sending the shuriken back towards Naruto. Naruto easily wove his way out of the shuriken barrage using his Sharingan. Chijiro tested his body to see if his movements were back to their normal speed when he caught something abnormal in his muscle movements. Chijiro's eyes widened when he realized what was wrong with his body. He casted a genjutsu on me when I looked into his eyes at the beginning of the match. Chijiro put his grand blade back in the holster on his back, needing both hands for what he was going to do next. Slapping his palms together, Chijiro cut off his chakra flow temporarily before releasing a concentrated wave of chakra out. Chijiro glanced back down to see that his muscle movements were no longer altered. It was only thanks to the intense muscle memory training that swordsmen go through that he was able to spot the minuscule change to his body. Chijiro hefted his large twin sword back into position with a grin that showed off his pointed, shark teeth, a trait shared by the swordsmen of the mist. In the stands, it's about time that kid realized he was under a genjutsu. Asuma muttered while leaning back into his chair, ignoring the disturbed frown on Kurenai's face from his smoking habit. Rubbing out the lid end on the arm of the chair, Asuma looked down at Naruto standing there calmly, like he was planning every step of the battle. Why didn't Naruto just finish him while he was under the Sharingan's genjutsu? He was never one to toy around with his opponent. Kurenai asked aloud, getting nods from the other Jounin sensei that had Naruto on their teammate at one point. Kiba scoffed at the fact that Naruto was the center of attention yet again. No one knows what's going on in that lunatic's mind. Kiba said rudely, not noticing that he didn't get the bark from Akamaru as usual because he had hopped into Hinata's lap for comfort. Kiba failed to notice Naomi getting behind him and bash him over the head with her fist. "Don't you insult my Nai-san, dog breath." Naomi shouted with a twitching brow and hair that was swaying like death itself, getting a few people around her to take a step back in fear for their safety. Kushina started to laugh happily, seeing her girl act just as she would, while the scarecrow of the group just sweat dropped at his students' antics. Combat field. Chijiro, now knowing his body was back at full operating speed, rushed forward, thrusting Hiramekure towards Naruto, who moved to evade the stabbing lunge but was caught in the ribs when Chijiro swung the flat side of his blade towards Naruto. Naruto growled at himself for falling for a feint as he used chakra to stop himself from tumbling around the floor. Naruto propelled off his back foot towards Chijiro, slicing down with his katana, but Chijiro's original speed proved enough for the Kurigakure shinobi to parry the direct assault. Breaking the assault, Chijiro swung his larger weapon down, forcing Naruto to drift to the left, throwing off an upcoming slash. Naruto and Chijiro continued to thrust and slash their swords, resulting in a clang each time their steel met the other's. Naruto looked to see his vest had a number of cuts on it, all from the past few exchanges with his opponent. Naruto scolded himself for falling behind Chijiro in swordsmanship. Even if he was in a group known for swordplay, it was still unacceptable. Naruto brandished his two-colored katana and began to channel his chakra into the metal of the katana. The white section gleamed brilliantly while the black section glowed menacingly, meeting in the middle, where a dull gray was illuminating the blade. Kami, severance from the material world. Naruto swung his glowing katana, and a thick wave of energy flew towards Chijiro, who was in the process of swinging his sword around in a circular motion. Suddenly, a large hole of chakra opened up in the air in front of Chijiro. The attack from Naruto was swallowed up by the hole created by Chijiro, getting Naruto to narrow his eyes in agitation, seeing his attack fail. Chijiro let his Hiramekure slump down, showing that creating that chakra hole took quite the hammer to his chakra reserves. Standing up, Chijiro willed himself as he went through his hand seals to push on the attack. Water release. Shark bomb. The water coming from Chijiro's mouth slowly formed into a great white shark that was looking at Naruto like its prey. Naruto didn't have enough time to dissect it before it swam forth towards Naruto. The Sharingan user found that the chakra was too concentrated for him to slice through. The Naruto brought off his guard just as the shark's powerful jaw ripped into his arms and drove him straight into the wall behind him. Chijuro, seeing the success of his attack, waited to see if he had done any serious damage with his last move. Naruto got back onto his feet and everyone could see the sleeves of his vest were shredded with blood dripping down his hairline and forearms. Naruto tapped into the soul link he had with Susei. "Hey Susei, are you still flying overhead?" Naruto asked with a slight pant as the damage to his body was a little more severe than he had expected from the water style. Naruto glared down Chijuro, his Sharingan seeming to burn through the swordsman's very soul. "I'm here Naruto-kun. What do you need me for?" "I can't really do anything significant," Susei admitted bitterly as she flew around Chijuro high in the sky escaping his attention. Naruto almost laughed when his partner admitted she couldn't help, but he had other plans. "Yes, you can just shed a nice amount of feathers around my opponent and I will take care of the rest," Naruto said, watching as the black feathers from Susei's wings started to fall all around Chijuro garnering his attention. Naruto smiled as he went through a few hand signs and focused on the space around Chijuro. Wind release. Shadow Hurricane. The wind around Chijuro started to swirl violently, taking the feathers around Chijuro, turning them into small swirling blades. The feathers also made the wind dark at night, hiding Chijuro from the eyes of the arena. Naruto knew that the feathers would be sped up by his wind release, making them very dangerous. Naruto started to go through the signs for the last step of his plan, his hands ending in the tiger sign. Fire release. Grand Fireball. Naruto holding the tiger seal added a different variation to the traditional fireball. From Naruto's mouth came the constant fire as it sped forward and touched a black hurricane that had Chijuro trapped in its eye. Once the flamethrower came into contact with the hurricane, the two elements melded and formed a huge explosion that caused a lot of smoke to rise into the air. Naruto knew the match was over once Susei came back and landed on his shoulder, knowing she saw the whole thing. Near the end of the field Chijuro was lying on his back with his glasses broken and his clothing charred. There were cuts all around his body, showing the feathers had done their job with the aid of the wind. The symbolic display of Hiramekure discarded on the ground away from Chijuro signaled the Kurigakure shinobi's defeat. Asuna Proctor stepped back into the center of the field after blowing away the ash of the burnt feathers. Winner by knockout, Naruto Namikaze Uzumaki Ichiya. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy it. If you want the next part of this video, turn on that bell notification. Like, subscribe and comment down below. And also check out the others videos I have created and enjoyed it. See you guys next video.